One of our
me.
former students. Yeah, thank you. But without ado, because it's early for you and it'll be late for people. So we'll chat after on WhatsApp.
Yeah. Should I take questions while talking or after?
So I think that if you do pressing questions where people just are not understanding you or desperately feel like they want to commit suicide, through your talk, so then I think otherwise, general discussions and data quibbles of Bangla speakers are generally better behaved than Hindi speakers. So I think
okay, I actually have more Hindi data than Bangla, so we'll see.
Oh dear. Then no data questions. No, seriously, people really disagree. So they can put it in the chat box and you can decide whether you want to take it up. Then or later. Okay?
Okay. Yeah. Saksha, start when you want me to. It'd be nice to see people's faces. So if your bandwidth does allow, please let me see your face. Otherwise, it's fine. Oh.
Hi, Aditi.
Aw, so many known faces.
Hi, Diti.
Hi.
It's actually nice to see everybody's faces. Hi, everyone.
It is. Hi.
Yes.
Hi, all. Hi, Diti.
Hi.
We can start.
Okay, I will share my screen and can everyone see my screen? Yep. Okay.
Yes, I can.
All right. Let me try and. Okay. Okay, so today I'll talk about, today and tomorrow, talk about modality and some aspects in modality, like some patterns we look at, some theories, and then we'll do some little bit of logic. Okay. So this is partially based on Portner 2009, which I suggested as a reading. It does take time to work through that book. So if you haven't managed to read all 3 chapters, that's fine. We'll work through some of this stuff. So what is modality? It allows us to the capacity to talk about objects and events that are displaced in space and time, as well as in actuality and potentiality. So things that could happen, might happen, et cetera, and things that are not real, we imagine, etc. These things. So one of the design features of language is displacement. I put that in there because that's one of the first things I learned as an MA student in JNU. Charles Hockett's design features, among which is displacement. And much later, I realized, okay, displacement is why we have modals. That property is embodied a lot in modal constructions. So this is a very Hockett. Whenever I hear Hockett, I remember walking through JNU and drinking chai and etc. So there are many modal expressions in our grammars. Here are some examples. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. You can have, and I've given English examples here, but just to start us off. So you see, you can have modal auxiliaries and verbs. You can have, all sorts of modal auxiliaries with different, modal interpretations. We can have modal adverbs like possibly, necessarily, maybe, etc., etc. We can have modal adjectives or nouns, adjectives like possible, necessary, probable, certain, etc. And then you can have, you know, nouns like need, necessity, possibility, etc. Oh, I just wanted to say, if you have pressing questions, please feel free to ask me while I'm talking. Propositional attitude verbs, you know, they starting from Hintika in 1969, there's a prominent sort of school of thought saying that these are modals also. So now there's a lot of work disagreeing with Hintika, but this was sort of the classical understanding. So think, believe, hope, know, please, these all have some sort of modal quantification over worlds. That was the idea. Then you have constructions like generics, habituals, individual level predicates. I have some examples here. Generics or linguist studies languages. Habitual, Diti teaches semantics. That's the construction for the habitual in English. Individual level predicates are inalienable properties. In this case, Aisha's hilarity is her inalienable property. Okay, conditionals, things which have, in English, you see the if. So if Utpal writes a book on NPIs, then I left the consequent open because a lot of things can ensue if Utpal ever writes that book. But okay, so then tense and aspect are known to have, you know, modal flavors, especially this future thing will. Then people have work on progressives also having modal properties, perfect aspects having modal properties. These examples are there. Then there is the whole phenomenon of evidentiality, which has different degrees of modality. I just have one example here. What seems, it seems like there's a tiger in that shed, you know, in some of your worlds, you know, it looks like given the evidence you have, etc., etc. So there's a modal quality there. And then we have Rajesh's work on covert modality, and we saw that infinitives can have modal flavors as well. So you can say the infinitive, Tim knows how to solve the problem. Hart argued that it actually means Tim knows how he can solve the problem. So he inserted a covert modal there, and it's a really expansive work on, you know, many different related constructions. Okay, so let's look at some examples from Hindi. Okay, okay, I will show you the whole range here. Let's start with, if anyone disagrees, as Aisha said, write in the chat, because I don't want to start, you know, right or something. Okay, so abhi wo ghar pe hoga. This hoga, so if you can say, the English translation is now he must be home. I did not take the liberty to gloss Hindi examples. So if anyone doesn't understand Hindi, I'm sorry about not having the glosses, but hopefully the translations are still helpful. So, so in this case, we have hoga with the flavor of epistemic. So based on someone's knowledge, I'm assuming people know these terms a little bit: epistemic, deontic, you know, ability, teleological, etc. So epistemic is based on an agent's knowledge. So that's your 1A. Or 1B can have both the deontic and epistemic reading. So for example, abhi use ghar pe hona chahiye. Right? You can have a reading where it is necessary that he does that in view of the rules, etc. That is your deontic flavor. Or based on my knowledge, what I know, he goes home, reaches home at this time, he should be home by now, which is my knowledge-based reading. Then you have the fascinating sakta in Hindi. So here is a simple-ish example. Wo 10 minute mein 2 kilometer daud sakta hai. Okay. So this has two readings at least. We will look at sakta in a little bit more detail. The translation can be he's able to run 2 kilometers in 10 minutes, which is your ability reading. Or you can have your deontic reading, which I think is not that salient, but people feel free to disagree with me, where he's required, like he's given the permission to do this thing. Okay. So that is your deontic, your permissions, etc. Then you have, so look how all of these things are different lexical items, right? So that's what I'm trying to point out here. These are all a list of modal expressions in Hindi. Then you have mujhe 2 minute mein 2 kilometer, mujhe 10 minute mein 2 kilometer daudna hai, where you have this infinitive form of the verb and the hai. This construction is your covert infinitive construction, which you will notice has 3 possible flavors. Right? This covert, it can be covertly deontic, or bulletic, or teleological. Okay. So I am required to run 2 kilometers in 10 minutes. I want to run 2 kilometers in 10 minutes, which is your bulletic, and I have to run 2 kilometers in 10 minutes, which is your maybe based on a goal. Like if I want to catch that bus, I have to do this. Okay, so teleological is basically an agent's goals, and bulletic is an agent's desires. Okay, and then you have your verb with ta. So tum kehte to wo kar leta, which is sort of going into the domain of maybe counterfactual, where if you would have said he would have done it, but there is also, I checked with some people, they do get an epistemic reading as well, where based on my knowledge, he would have done it. And then you have your infinitive form of the verb and padega. So tumhe ye kaam karna padega, which again has 2 readings, deontic, teleological, where you have to do this work, like I require you to do this work, or based on your goals, you should do this, or you have to do this, right? If you have to graduate in time, you have to take this course, or something, ye karna padega, lena padega, etc. Okay, so already we are seeing a lot of ambiguity, right? We are seeing one modal expression able to have multiple interpretations. I want to zoom in on sakta because I remember as a student, Aisha, I don't know if you remember this, but we talked a lot about sakna in listen. For example, I don't know if anyone's actively working on this. Please let me know if you are. It's very interesting. Here are some readings that I could delineate for just sakta in Hindi. So I've taken a very simple example. Ram ye kar sakta hai. Okay. So one interpretation is Ram can do it. He's physically able to. Another modal interpretation is he can do it as in now he's allowed to, I'm giving him permission to. You can also paraphrase it with the English may or might with an epistemic reading. I'm not sure if he will certainly will do it, but there's a possibility given what I know about him. Then there is a morality reading. So again, paraphrasable with a may. The moral ethics we live by do not prevent him from doing it. So he can do it, he may do it, if he wants to. And then there is a teleological reading where he can do this to achieve a particular goal. Ye Ram kar sakta hai. So basically, if he has to get 3 credits, he can take either course, ye course le sakta hai wo. So to achieve that goal. So you're seeing with sakta, we have at least 5 readings. Some of you might be able to think of more readings with this modal. So yes, so it's pretty fascinating how all these interpretations come into play with sakta. Let me ask you guys to, if you can raise your hands via the participant button, if anyone thinks this is lexical ambiguity. So for example, it all comes from the lexicon. Sakta comes from the lexicon with all of these meanings. Don't fear, raise your hand if you believe in the power of the lexicon. Anyone? Okay, everyone's very smart here. No one's raising their hands. Yeah, so the prevalent view is this is not a lexical thing. It's contextual, right? We'll see that in a second. So what we're seeing is massive amounts of ambiguity and underspecification in modal flavors. So these differences you're seeing, deontic, teleological, epistemic, bulletic, ability, these are all called modal flavors, right? These are different interpretations related to modals. So we're seeing underspecification there. So, so then the question that I was asked very early on is, should we consider the existence of these patterns as a result of accidental polysemy? That, oh, okay, lexically, they all these flavors exist. Kratzer came into the scene in 1981, 1991. Her seminal papers, she's influenced a lot by the philosopher David Lewis and his possible world works on possible worlds, etc. And she adopts that into the natural language semantics frameworks that she works with. And she says, no, this is the result of contextual dependency. Okay, so it's not lexical, it's not accidental polysemy, it's contextual dependency. So her idea was extremely powerful. Why? Because she gave modals by themselves a very skeletal meaning. Modals by themselves have if you look at the actual denotation of a modal in a modern criterion framework, you'll see by itself, it just has some quantificational force. Like by itself, it almost has no meaning. What it encodes inside it are two sort of bodies of, propositions or extra information that comes from the context. Okay. So this was her, very innovative idea that the only way we can even begin to think about a pattern like we see in 2, for example, is to think as context playing a huge role. And how to formalize that is her work on modality. Okay, so I have drawn this diagram here to show you that modal flavors can be many. So the modal flavors you see outside the circle, and then each modal flavor can come with a different modal force. So primarily in this diagram, I'm trying to distinguish modal flavor from modal force, which are two central concepts of modality. So so I just wanted to mention you can also get variable force models. I will not be I will not have time to talk about them in this workshop, but you see a lot of recent work on variable force models. So we already know, so in a way, these are the sakta is a variable flavor model, right? You can call it like that because it has so many flavors. Right? But it's still a possibility, right? People can ask me if they're not sure about these terms: necessity, possibility, and gradability. So basically, necessity is quantification over all the world. So this is so all your entire domain, quantification over your entire domain. Possibility is existence of at least one unit in the domain that satisfies whatever criteria you're looking at. And gradability I have here with a scale means degrees of modality, so degrees of probability, etc. So so yes, so modals come with flavors and force, and then for each flavor you can have different kinds of forces. You can have necessity, possibility, gradability, etc. So you can have epistemic necessity, epistemic possibility, gradable epistemic models. You can have deontic necessity, deontic possibility, gradable deontic models, etc. So for each of the things here. Dynamic is a term Portner coins for abilities. Before that is just called ability model, but he's the one that calls it dynamic. So I went with that term. Do we have any questions still here? Am I going too fast? There is something in the
The
chat.
page seems fine. Not too fast, not too slow.
Vyom wants me to zoom in on the diagram. Okay, get ready. It took me, I will not say how long to make this diagram. Okay, I will not reveal that. Okay, here is the diagram. Okay. Now, so anything. So
Diti, there's a question. There's a question.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm very bad in managing chat. So if someone can just jump in like that and.
Yeah, Sakshi,
yeah, Sakshi, please read out.
Okay, I was hoping we could just like have a in-between session for questions. I don't want to interrupt you every time.
Just go ahead, man.
Yeah, man.
So Tanvi is asking, are the flavors, are the forces aspects of the flavors?
Force and flavor, if I understand your question correctly, are distinct things. So one is not an aspect of the other. Okay, so in a way you can say each of them are force and flavor are sort of, divorced from each other. You have to, in your semantics, bring in the force somehow and bring in the flavor somehow. If you're bringing in the force, let's say you're bringing in somehow in your semantics epistemic force, then you can't, also say it also that epistemic force gives you what kind of quantification. No, Something else has to give you the force of quantification. Okay, she says she got it. Okay. So, right, so we see a lot of possibilities here, right? So we have multiple flavors, even within Deontic. I want to draw your guys' attention to Deontic modality. Within it, you see there are, you have modal flavors based on laws, modal flavors based on obligations, based on permissions, based on morality. So they're all clubbed as Deontic. But within it, you have a lot of variation possible. So any theory of modality in natural language has to have to explain how to account for these different flavors within the same framework. So this was a very fundamental goal of modality. Now, modal logic work on modality is very far advanced. But this was one of the fundamental questions that Kratzer was, for example, grappling with in linguistics. Let's say the logicians were not that interested in this question because it's to do with natural language. But over today and tomorrow, I want to, look at ways we can answer this question, this fundamental question. How can we account for these differences within the same framework and then correlate them with differences in modal force? So we are going to look at two influential schools of thought bearing on this issue. We are today going to talk about modal logic. Accessibility relations in particular is what I'm going to focus on because they have been used to try and explain our natural language expressions. And tomorrow we are going to talk about natural language semantics, which is your possible worlds theory, which is Kratzer's work. So I am not going to be able to talk about many other different interesting aspects of modality. For example, interaction with scopal operators like negation, quantifiers, conditionals, questions, direct interaction with tense and aspects. I will not have time to talk about temporality within modality at all. Their interaction with disjunction, which is an effect called free choice, cross-type related phenomena like modal subordination, relationship with other speech-acty things like imperatives, etc. Then you have the very related phenomena of evidentiality, which, as Sakshi told you, my dissertation was on, but I will not be able to talk about that in today and tomorrow. So if I'm losing any interested parties who were interested in this, I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to try and discuss a more fundamental question so that it's more of a introductory primer on modality. So these are more advanced topics in modality once you have this sort of in your knowledge base. Okay, so accessibility relations. Let's start with that. That's what we'll talk about today. So this notion comes to us from logic. What is logic? Logic comprises studying systems of reasoning. Any reasoning system that you have doesn't have to be modal reasoning. Any sort of reasoning is logic. And then modal logic involves the concepts of necessity, possibility, of implication, obligation, etc. I want to harp on this as much as I possibly can. The second bullet point there under section 2, modal logic is not the same thing as linguistics of modal expressions. I have seen many students who confuse them, saying that, oh, if I'm doing modal logic, I'm necessarily doing natural language semantics. No, that is not true. Modal logic is with the abstract concepts of implication, necessity, possibility, obligation. These are very abstract concepts, irrespective of natural language forms. Okay, so this will take you far beyond natural language if you want to delve deep into the reasoning systems. Natural language semantics or modal semantics is what brings in insights from modal logic into natural language semantics. So these are things two things which are different. Okay, so this is what I have there. We have different, forms, must, possible, sakna, hona, zaruri, dorkar, uchitar for the Bengalis in the audience. And uchitam is a Telugu modal that I recently learned about, etc. I'm sorry, my representation is my sample size is so small. So if you guys want to give me some modal words in the chat, that would be great with the language. But anyway, the point is, no matter what language you're dealing with, no matter what modal word you're dealing with, modal logic patterns are, outside of that. Okay. Okay, so we begin with some essential tools. So let's call this modal logic little language that we'll deal with MLL a la Purner. So you have very familiar things like you have propositional variables. You have a bunch of operators on those propositions. So if alpha is a sentence, then its negation is also a sentence in our language. Conjunction, disjunction, and conditionals are also legit operators in our system. And then we have necessity and possibility. So if alpha is a sentence of this language, then necessarily alpha is also a sentence of this language. And possibly alpha is also a sentence of this language. For people who haven't seen the box and diamond before, it just means necessarily and possibly. It's all operators borrowed from modal logic to capture the quantificational force. And we have some other so we have this sort of inventory, and then we should be aware that some of these are derivable from other more basic operators. So for example, I'll let you guys work out these in your own time, but I just wanted to sort of flag these sort of basic ones. Alpha and beta is equivalent to saying it is not the case that not alpha or not beta. If you do the truth conditions, that you learn in semantics of the operators, this equivalence should follow. Then material implication, if alpha then beta, is equivalent to saying not alpha or beta. Okay, again, if you do the material implication truth conditions. And then we have this sort of a modal statement that is possible, that is necessarily beta is equivalent to saying it is not the case that it's possible that not beta. So think about it. So if you're saying necessarily something, then you're saying it is not the case that there is a possibility that it can be negated. Okay, so these
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
So here you have said that if say alpha is a sentence in MLI, then so is negation of alpha, right? So if I have verbs like when you have verbal morphology like done and undone, how do you incorporate that? Like you're negating the verb by morphology, but it's not a sentence. So how does that work?
So in this modal logic language, we have not included subsentential elements, if that makes sense. So if you're trying to capture verbal elements, you need a more powerful system. Like this is just looking at propositions because it's modal logic. Does that make sense? Yeah. So so your verbal is subsentential, and then we would have some need other things. Yeah. Okay. So till now we have looked at these logical operators, etc. How do we get into the modal part of things? I highly recommend Hugo and Kressel's textbook. It's a very nice thing to work out over a few months by yourself. It's very educational. Okay, so we will talk about frames and models. Okay, so what is a frame? A frame is a pair containing some sort of a unit called W and some sort of relation called R. What is this W? Technically, W can be a set of anything. Okay, you can take a set of any objects and then have relations on them, right? To give you certain kinds of results. But in modal logic, it's usually let's talk about possible worlds. Okay, so W is a set of possible worlds. And then R is a relation on W. This R can have many manifestations. So let's look at some manifestations, okay? For people who are seeing this for the first time, I want to harp that this might not be a very intuitive idea at first, but think about it this way. This relation is very, very important in this setup. It's because it's the fundamental mechanism that allows the worlds to talk to each other. Okay, ask me if this doesn't make sense. If you have a set of worlds, think of them as discrete worlds, right? Sitting there. There is no possible way for the worlds to see each other unless you have a relation on that set. Different types of relations will give you different types of talking or conversation between the worlds. Okay. So here are some relations. You can have a reflexive frame. So you guys might have heard of this property of reflexivity. This is a reflexive frame if and only if for every world in W, it bears a relation, that exact relation to itself. Now this relation can be anything. Right? But the idea is if it bears the relation to itself, then it's reflexive. Then you have symmetrical. So WR is a symmetrical frame if and only if for every W and every U is another world that exists in this set of worlds, then the relation holds between WU and the linear order switched also. So R holds between U and W. So it's symmetrical. Then you have a serial frame, which is for every W in the set of worlds, there is some world out there where the relation holds. So basically, no world is going unrequited. You know, every world has a counterpart. Then you have your transitive property. This might be very familiar to most of you. So let's say you have 3 worlds in this set. And then if the relation holds between W and U, and the relation holds between U and V, then the relation has to hold between W and V. And then equivalence frame is this hard to achieve goal, but it's a frame where all of these, except for the seriality frame, so except for C, transitive, symmetric, and reflexive frame together, a frame that has both reflexive property, symmetric property, and transitive property. It's called an equivalence frame. Okay, so think of these frames as ways a world can talk to or access its friends. Suppose you and your friends are cooped up in a house, but the only way you guys can talk to each other are through these relations, right? So think of these relations as emails or text messages or throwing a letter outside the window and things like that. So each of these things are relations. Each of these things are ways you're accessing another world. Okay, so it's evident where I'm going with this. The idea is that R is basically the basis of our accessibility relations. Okay. And this term comes from Kripke semantics, which a lot of modal logic is also influenced from, especially logicians who work on philosophy of language and stuff like that, which was a system created by Kripke and Yoel in late 1950s. So these R's will give us ways to give us those accessibility relations, right? So think of them that way. I have drawn a little diagram here. By now you guys can tell I like drawing little things. Here, I want to ask you guys to tell me what the relations are in between the worlds. Sakshi, I'm not being able to annotate this PDF. Maybe I don't have the, I wanted to write on it, but. Is there
for that we'll have to do a whiteboard. I don't think if you can write on the screen itself.
So usually there's an annotate option, but maybe.
Let me see.
Okay. Never mind. I'll just say and you guys can hear, or you guys say and we will all imagine. Okay. So tell me, do you see a reflexive relation anywhere? Property of reflexivity in any way embodied in this diagram? Anyone can speak up and give me an example.
Yeah, Vyom says W and U.
Yes, so I can, okay, I'll write in the chat. So W is in a reflexive relationship with itself. So everyone can look at the chat, right? Where R is where this R that I just wrote is reflexive. Same for U. So R, so the reflexive relation also holds between you and you. Right. Okay. Is there a transitive relation between two worlds? Between three worlds, let's say. Viom, why are you saying V and U are in a transitive relationship?
R is in a V is in a relation with W, and W is in a relationship with U. No, sorry, it would be the other way around, I guess.
But do you see, okay, so V is in a relationship with W. Yes. W is in a relation. I like how we are saying in a relationship with. I don't think that term is used in modal logic. You know, the relation holds between. Okay, but sure, V is in a relationship with W. W is in a relationship with U, but do you see a arrow between V and U?
Yeah, no. So there isn't here.
Right. So what Vyom has written though, this I will copy Vyom's answer here, is a different type of relation. No, actually V and U have no relation. Okay. What about V and W? What is the relation there? Symmetrical. That's right. So each of them, you know, so arrow is supposed to tell you the double-ended arrow, etc. And then, so you guys can see that W is in a relationship with U. Oh, I can't believe I'm saying in a relationship with. W bears a relation to U. The world's, you can access U one way only from W, right? So you can say this is maybe a serial frame, etc., because it doesn't go the other way. Okay, so all of that. So even within this little diagram, we are seeing several relationships possible, right? And in a lot of modal logic papers that you read, or you know, philosophy papers, you will see these kind of diagrams. Okay, and what they are supposed to embody are these relations. Okay. All right. Any questions about this? So, if I had to formally capture V and U's relationship, I would say there is no relationship in modal logic. That means V is not accessible from U, right? V is not directly accessible from U. U is not directly accessible from V. Okay, so this is the question I just asked you. People are writing everything.
Sorry.
Anjali has a question. If you can explain the serial frame again.
Okay, serial frame. So basically serial frame means if you have a world, there is another world in that set that is accessible to it via the serial relation. So for every W, there is, so think of it like some pen pal far away. Every person in our set has a pen pal that is accessible. That's a serial frame. So for every world, there is a world that's accessible.
Can it be like a function then, like in mathematical terms, because that's how you define a function, that everything should have an output.
Yeah, but it can also be one to many.
Yeah, right? One to many. Yeah.
Function cannot be. Yeah,
one
function
to many.
cannot
Yes.
be one to many. Yeah. Okay, and Utpal has also here written serial means every world can see at least one world. Okay, so now, so we have sort of tried to figure out some of these basic relations. Now let's try to define a model. Okay, so a model is a pair. So it takes a frame. Frame we already know is a pair itself. This is a frame. So a model takes a frame and also adds on top of it a valuation function. Okay, so basically it takes a proposition in a world and gives you what its truth value is in that world, right? So this is the simplest way to write what a model can be. Okay. So how does evaluation work? Evaluation function work? It's very simple. Like you would say, P is true or false in this world. Valuation function is the official thing in model semantics that gives you that value, that takes a world and takes a proposition and gives you a value. Okay. So you can do this for all atomic propositions, right? As well as all derived complex propositions with these operators. So, so any questions still here before I move on to validity? Okay, so we also have a useful property of validity in modal logic. Okay, this can get very hairy very fast. I'm not going to get too much into the details, but a couple of things that might be interesting for us at an introductory level. So a sentence is considered to be, a sentence alpha is considered to be valid in a model if and only if alpha is true for every W in that big set of worlds that's in the model. Validity on a frame is very different. So a sentence alpha is valid on a frame if and only if for every valuation function V, alpha is valid in the corresponding model. But remember, validity on a frame is dependent, so it's dependent on the valuation function. So if you keep the frame the same, but you keep changing the valuation function, you will get different validities of a sentence. Okay, let's try and demonstrate that. I just wanted to point out that, so these two things are separate, validity on a model and validity on frame. And validity on a frame comes in many different versions, depending on the types of frames you're dealing with. So if you quickly recall, we have at least 5 types of frames here, right? Depending, so think about it, each type of frame will have a different term for the validity in that frame. So here are some examples and a footnote that I have here. So you can have, so K valid is valid on every frame. No matter what frame you give it, that sentence is valid. That's a K valid sentence. T valid only valid on reflexive frames. B valid only valid on symmetric frames. D valid only on serial frames. S4 valid only valid on transitive frames. S5 valid only on equivalence frames. Okay, so so yeah, so you get different versions of validity. Let's look at an example here. So for example, take a sentence that is considered to be T valid. So if necessarily P, then P. Okay. So let's think abstractly about this before we look at a natural language counterpart. So take this sentence. Now take a reflexive frame. Here are 2 natural language counterparts. If Ram must be home now, then he is at home now. Okay, what did I do here? What is this P? Remember, the P is the thing that is in the scope of the modal, right? So I just have that thing here in the consequent of the conditional, and in the antecedent, I have the necessarily P. Okay. So if you intuitively think about it, then the idea is that 9A is T valid because intuitively that sentence is true. Whereas here is 9B, if Sita must eat 10 rasgullas to win, here you can tell I'm missing rasgullas, especially during its Durga Puja time, etc. So I might get very, nostalgic about food, like all Bengalis. But here are some examples of rasgullas. So if Sita must eat 10 rasgullas to win, then she will eat 10 rasgullas. Okay, where your must is deontic. So if it is required to be the case, then she will do it. That is, of course, not intuitively true, right? If you're required to do something, it doesn't go through that you will do it. So, so the idea is that a deontic, the sentence with the deontic interpretation is not T valid because the sentence is not true. So that tells us that T validity is something that can be useful for epistemic logic, but maybe not for deontic logic. We'll see a little bit more elucidation of this in a second. Now, if you take another sentence, which is considered to be both T-valid and D-valid. So D-valid, remember, is valid on a serial frame. Okay. So if you take this sentence, if necessarily P, then possibly P. Now, if you have these same natural language counterparts, similar, but with some important differences, that you have a possibility model in the consequent. So now you have two possible flavors for each sentence, right? So if Ram must be at home now, then he might be at home now. And we intuitively can see that is true because with a epistemic reading. However, if you say, if Sita must eat 10 rasgullas to win, okay, then where must is deontic, and you have a possibility force downstairs with a different deontic flavor. So for example, if Sita must eat 10 rasgullas to win, if she's required to eat, then she has the permission to eat 10 rasgullas. So this sentence we can intuitively think is true. If in a required context she must win 10, then okay, she has a permission to eat 10. So, yeah.
Are you saying that's intuitively true, 10B?
What do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, she might be sick from something and she wants to win a competition and eat 10 rasgullas, but she might not have permission. She might not be allowed to.
In one world, yes, but like in another world, she wants to win and she may eat, right?
So remember, this is with the may, you're doing the possibility is very important. So you have, Utpal wants to say something, I think. So the possibility part is very important, right? So in a possible world, she has permission to do this.
What I meant was you have to keep the flavor of the modal constant, because otherwise, you know, what
right.
they said
Yes.
is kind of, yeah.
Right.
If she must,
okay, so
then she is allowed to eat 10 rasgullas to win. I think that goes, and that's what you mean. That's what.
Right. Okay. So
yeah.
So basically, with this reading, that if she, to win, if you need to eat 10 rasgullas, then you're allowed to eat 10 rasgullas. Think about it this way: if you have to eat 10 to win, then there is a possible world where you are allowed to eat 10, right? Otherwise, no one would ever be allowed to eat 10, and then you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, according to the rules of the game, you're allowed to eat 10.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So if you're not ever allowed to eat 10, then no one will win the competition. Then why are you saying she has to eat 10? Right. Okay. So so that is so with deontic interpretation, now we are seeing that D-validity can go through with this particular, let's say, example sentence. So then this notion of seriality has been, used in deontic logic and not in epistemic logic. One thing, I said that opposite. So D-validity is not used in deontic logic. D-validity is used in deontic logic. And I'll talk a little bit more about why. So when you have a set of rules, why does seriality become important? Okay, so, and I just wanted to flag that epistemic models, remember, are both T-valid and D-valid, and often epistemic models are taken to invoke equivalence frames. And we'll see why that's sort of an idealized notion of an epistemic agent to have an equivalence frame. But, that's assumed in idealized notions of knowledge. Okay, so far we've been talking about modal flavor. So all of these different, interpretations. Just to remind ourselves, these operators impose a layer of quantification on the accessibility relations. So far I've been talking about how you can get an accessibility relation. There are different kinds of accessibility relations. right, with different properties. But your box and diamond impose a layer of quantification. So very quickly, necessarily P is true if and only if for every world in W accessible to our little W, then P holds in all of those worlds. That's necessarily that is necessarily the case. So it doesn't matter what type of accessibility relation. So till now it mattered what type of accessibility relation. Now when we're looking at force, it doesn't matter what the accessibility relation is as long as there is universal quantification. So what is the box giving us? It's just giving us the quantity of accessible worlds with the proposition holds. And so this is a natural way to think about modal force. So remember I started saying that in the beginning that we have to make a distinction between force and flavor. So in modal logic, the flavor comes from the types of accessibility relations, and the force comes from these operators. Okay, if this is unclear to people, how are we getting the division of labor, then ask me. Okay, so this is what I have here. So you can have accessibility relations in terms of knowledge, rules, permissions, obligations, goals, desires, circumstances, etc. So we can write things like this, right? So we can now define an epistemic frame where basically this relation holds between two worlds. Okay. But based on our knowledge criteria that we want. So what are we doing? We are taking our R that could be possibly anything and putting it inside a frame that we are labeling epistemic, saying that the relation is epistemic. Okay, so a relation which holds between two worlds, W and U, if and only if everything that an agent I knows in W is also true in U. Okay. So this is called an epistemic accessibility relation, my 13b here. Okay. And what about these properties we just learned about, seriality, reflexivity, transitivity? You can try and apply these properties to these accessibility relations. So knowledge, for example, is always considered to have the property of reflexivity. This is a very powerful idea. Think about it this way. If you know something, then you know that you know something. Or I should put it this way. If you know something, then you know that you know it. So it bears a reflexive relation on itself. Okay. So so we say epistemic frames are reflexive. This is what I was saying earlier. If you assume an idealized account of knowledge where agents are perfect reasoners with infinite memory. Yes, we are all like that. We are perfectly reasonable with infinite memory capacity. If you assume that, we are not like that. That was, not how human beings work usually. But if you assume in modal logic, I'm not going to look at human beings and their language. I'm just going to look at idealized notions. Then you can say that the knowledge epistemic frame actually has an equivalence relation where it's reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. Right? Those relations will all hold. But we know that knowledge derived from different types of evidence and inferences can sometimes admit errors. Bonfim and Gillis is a good example of that. Recently, I've done some work with Romanian epistemic future, where inferences come from the inferences can often admit errors, and it's grammaticalized in the language. And then looking at the time, I want to sort of sorry, do you want someone to say something?
I had a question. So when we are saying that knowledge has a reflective relation on itself, how are we defining knowledge? Is it knowledge how, knowledge that? And then you again have problems like Wittgenstein posed, right? What about pain? When you say, I know I'm in pain, what does that mean? So how are we defining knowledge here? Like on what basis logically?
So usually knowledge, so there is a long tradition of work in philosophy, but so there's one tradition that believes knowledge is core justified belief. Right. So if you have belief in something and there's a way, to verify that belief, then that's the basis of knowledge. So if you say, I know I'm in pain, you have the core justified belief that you are in pain, so you technically know it. Right. So that's the idea. Every fact meaning everything that's true in the world, an agent may or may not know that fact, but if there is a fact that an agent technically knows, then that fact is true in the world. Okay, so that's how that's defined. Knowledge is a, let's say, a set of facts, and facts are true in the world, in the whatever world you're looking at. Okay, so Deontic frame has almost the same setup, except that you want a set of rules. R. I've denoted that with a small r here, which is different from the big R. So the small r gives every world a set of rules. Okay. So that's the, one second. Yeah, so that's the idea here. So as it's written here, the relation which holds between two worlds, W and U, if and only if all of the rules which are established by R, so R takes every world and gives it a set of rules. Think of it this way, the small r. And then the big R says, okay, the small r has given us these rules. Now let's look at which worlds these rules are followed in. Right? So the output of this big R relation will be a set of worlds where all the rules in your evaluation world are followed. Right? Or whichever world you're standing in and looking at other worlds. And I wanted to bring back the notion of seriality. Why is seriality often used in deontic logic? There is this notion of a consistent versus inconsistent set of rules. So consistent set of rules is things that are not contradictory. Okay, so now if you have the notion of seriality, then you're saying for every world, there is some world where all the rules in that first world are followed. Okay. So this rules out the possibility of having inconsistent rules. You guys see what I mean? So if you have a rule, let's say P in a world, and you have neg P is the same set, then you won't get a world where both P and neg P are true. Right? That's the idea. Right? So it helps us rule out inconsistent set of rules. So yeah, so seriality helps us have a consistent set of rules. That's why it's used in deontic logic. Again, this is an idealized notion of a deontic relation because we might have contradictory requirements. And I won't go too much into that, but you guys can think of natural language examples where, in reality, you have, requirements which are contradictory. Okay, so I have 5 minutes. So let me see how much we can do. Tomorrow we'll take over again. Necessity models are, of many types, as we saw here, many different forms, possibility models, many different forms. So we have talked about the abstract logical notions till now. If you want to write out such a relation, then you can write it out like this, right? Why is this a set of worlds? If you look at the definition of these accessibility relations in informal terms here and inside a frame, then you can see it will give you a set of worlds always. If people are not clear about this, feel free to ask me. This is a fundamental sort of understanding of an accessibility relation. The output of that will be a set of worlds because you're looking at the set that has that relation with the first world you were looking at. So it will always be a set of worlds. So you can write it like this. An epistemic relation given a world W is a set of worlds in which all the known facts in W hold. Okay. Deontic, let's say we're dealing with rules. Remember, deontic has many different types, laws, obligations, etc., etc. Let's say we're dealing with rules, and you can write it this way. Okay. So within deontic necessity, we have a distinction between strong and weak necessity. Okay. For example, you can club strong necessity as things like must, necessary, have to, versus should, ought, etc. So there are several tests for doing that. I have 2 over here. Strong necessity models can reinforce weak ones, but not vice versa. So you can say you should wash your hands. In fact, you must. You're reinforcing what the weak necessity model just said, but you can't do the opposite. You can't say you must wash your hands. In fact, you should. That sounds very strange. Okay. Another test, weak necessity models are compatible with the negation of strong ones, but not vice versa. So you can say you ought to or should do the dishes. but you don't need to, or you don't have to. Okay? But you can't say the opposite. You need to have to do the dishes, but it's not the case that you should or ought to. Okay. Organizers, is it okay if I take 10 extra minutes to finish this handout? If people want to leave, they can leave. I can.
I think it's fine.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So, so these are sort of your standard tests to detect strengths. And if you want to look at some thoughts on deontic necessity in Bangla and some connections in Hindi and Telugu to some extent, some recent work with Orko Banerjee, who I believe is here in the audience. We have been looking at that, and we presented that at Sinung Badaratam recently. So I have the handout link if you want to look at it. Okay, so within modal logic, we want to capture this relationship, right? So remember, must is a strong necessity model, and should is quote unquote a weak necessity model. So we should see entailment that way. Otherwise, these tests even don't make sense if you don't have that entailment. So we want to capture this relationship, must P entails should P. So let's see how we go about doing it. Remember, we are dealing with both, let's say we are dealing with both deontic necessity models, not bringing in epistemics here, because both of these can have epistemic readings, okay? So remember, your little r gives you the set of rules in a world, right? So let little r must be the set of rules on which the accessibility relation of this big R is based, right? Given a world. And same for should. So we can write it this way. R must and R should can both be written exactly the same way, right? I want to harp on this a little bit because both of these are necessity models, right? So look at their denotations of the accessibility relations, you know, attached to them. They look exactly the same. They're saying, given this accessibility relation, I have universal quantification over all of the worlds. That is the output of that accessibility relation. The denotation is the same. So where is the difference coming from between must and should? How are we getting that weak strength difference? It's because of these rules, right? These things tell us what's at the basis of the accessibility relation. So you can think about it this way. Should is sensitive to more rules than must. Okay, must is okay, I'm looking at a smaller set, and given this set of rules, you have to do it. Should can have other considerations, like, oh, maybe it's not proper to do it. Maybe, you know, whatever. So here's an example. So if I say, you must touch the feet of all elders when you meet them. This is in an Indian context, of course. And then someone uses a should modal on top. So that's saying that, okay, but there are other considerations, right? So if they're technically older, but they're your same generation, will you touch their feet? Okay, if an elder doesn't like their feet being touched, are you still going to touch their feet? You know, is it polite in that context to go around touching people's feet? These are other things that should is sort of sensitive to, that must by itself is not. So think about it this way. Okay, so the thing I was saying is both are deontic necessity models, but crucially there is no difference. The rules make the difference, right? And should is sensitive to more things than must. Okay. So here are some steps to try and prove, we're trying to prove this. Okay. I hope this is sort of, you know, familiar to people. If you have a set of propositions, like a set of rules here, your R, little r, if you do generalized intersection on a set of proposition, it gives you the set of worlds that proposition is true in. Suppose I have three propositions, P, Q, R. I do generalized intersection, then it will give me a set of worlds where P, Q, and R are all true. Okay, so this is a, you know, a sort of equivalence, you can say. So now let's do the steps. If you have set of rules M for must, set of rules S for should, we know that must, the set of rules is smaller for must than should. So this subset system goes through. So the subset relation. Set of rules for must is a subset of the set of rules for should. Okay, we started with this, we know this. However, when you look at the corresponding set of worlds, then the subset relation is reversed. Okay, so then you say, okay, then the generalized intersection or the accessibility relation for should is a subset of the accessibility relation for must. So this can also be written this way with the generalized intersection. So the subset relation reverses once we take intersections. So look at Portner's representation of the relationship. Maybe this will, be easy to see. I'm sorry that the figure went down into the margin, but basically this is saying that must is sensitive to these two circles in solid lines. Should is sensitive to all of these and also this, a dashed line circle. Now look at the idea here. If you're doing generalized intersection over these sets of propositions, these ovals are all sets of propositions. If you're doing generalized intersection, you will end up with a bigger gray area for must than for should. People see why. This is the insight that I have here. The more things you care about, the smaller the intersection of worlds will be where all of those things are true. This is a general life lesson we take from modal logic. The more things, the more propositions you have to make true, of course the intersection will be smaller and smaller. If this is not intuitively, clear to people, feel free to ask me. If you have more and more things to make true, then you have a smaller and smaller set of worlds where all of that will be true. So since must has less things to make true than should, therefore the intersection leads us to a bigger circle than should. Okay. And this is how the weakness of should falls out. So you have a smaller set of worlds that is accessed by should than by must. Okay, so when you have quantification over, so it looks like, oh, the denotation is the same though between the two. Yes, the denotation is the same, but what the quantificational domain for this operator is smaller for should than for must. Yeah. So all of these worlds that should can access, look at it. The should statement says, okay, this inner circle, all of the worlds, my P is true, but the circle itself is smaller than the circle for must. So that's how you get weakness in your between your deontic necessity models. Okay, so now we can confirm that must be entails should be. If people want to work through this, Sakshi, should I share the handout maybe in chat after the talk is over? If people want to.
Yeah, and maybe you can send it to me so that I can send an email.
Yeah, you can send on the email because you can't download from on the chat.
Ah, okay. So if people want to work through this in their own time, sure. And then tomorrow you can ask me questions about it. I will try to wrap up now. Okay, so within deontic necessity, we are seeing these differences. Get out of deontic necessity. Before we get out, you have other kinds of things in deontic necessity that I said. You can have accessibility relations based on rules. You can have accessibility relations based on permissions. Same for obligations, same for morals, etc. Now, how do we know these things exist? You can look at just must and the many accessibility relations it can have. For example, you can say, in view of the laws of Minnesota, drivers must yield to pedestrians. In view of the traditions of our family, you as the youngest child must touch the feet of all elders. In view of the rules of student-teacher relationships, you must not yell at your teachers. This thing in brackets, Kratzer pointed out, that these can be infinitely many. Right? In view of these laws, in view of those rules, in view of those obligations, in view of these permissions. Right? Every time you utter a must, you might be looking at different sort of accessibility relations. Because each of the rules you're looking at, remember these rules given to us by our baby R here, can be different for each sentence here. So this can be infinitely many. You can have many corners of rules in your life that you're always using must for. Okay. So what is starting to look like a problem here? Massive overgeneration. massive overgeneration with this framework of modal logic, where the modality, the flavor comes from accessibility relations. You can have infinitely many. So what is the problem? Your natural language models may not even have those meanings that your modal logic even allows you. So that's massive overgeneration. And then you get out of Deontic modality and you have a bunch of other things to worry about, right? Other flavors. So you have your ability or dynamic reading, dogs can swim. You have, given how much you love semantics, you should attend the modality workshop, which all of you are. Thank you for being here over time too. So that's a desire. Then to get into JNU, you have to study hard. That's a goal. Reading of, have to. A pandemic may eventually wipe out large sections of humanity. The history is happening now, but it's a historical reading of that model, right? So now you have all of these other things to worry about. So imagine how many accessibility relations you are possibly able to generate with the system. Here I have an example of our bulletic just written out here, just like the other ones I have. So we already in our system have built in this problem of massive ambiguity or under specification. And this is just exasperated when you look at things like sakta. If you have a reading, so these are all the readings I had on the first page, you can have an accessibility relation which is dynamic. Let's say it gives you this set of worlds. You can have an accessibility relation which is based on permission. Say it gives you this set of worlds. You can have an accessibility relation based on epistemic with sakta, gives you this set of worlds, etc., etc. Morality gives you this set of worlds. Teleological gives you another set of worlds. Okay. So with one model, you're able to have so many accessibility relations. Okay, so, and then you can ask the question, okay, but within modal logic, what prevents 10 other accessibility relations to be generated with for Sakna? There's nothing preventing that in the system. Right? And I have a footnote here saying that we haven't even looked at indexicality of models. This is another topic I will not be able to touch on. So contextual parameters like speakers, hearers, times, location, standing at this time, I, the speaker, I'm saying something. Often models have that information. So imagine if you have those information built in, then you can have even more overgeneration. So I can speak based on Sakshi's knowledge base. Right? Sakshi can speak based on Aisha's knowledge base. So all of these are possibilities, but of course we don't use that. I don't use an epistemic model based on Sakshi's knowledge base, right? I can only use it based on my knowledge base. But the system allows us to generate that I'm speaking based on what Sakshi knows. That's not how people use models. Okay, so thus we understand the nature of the formal relations and properties better from our discussion today. But have we really in the literature, not just from my discussion, entire literature works that have looked at this, but have we made real progress up to this point in modal logic to provide an account of modality in natural language? That's the question. And this is, I don't know if you guys can see, but this is Kratzer's face. She came in at this point and she said, unfortunately, no. This is her 1981 actually 1977, she already was saying these things. She's saying, no, with this kind of framework, you cannot have an account of modality in natural language. This is way too powerful, way too, it's massive. It's too massive, right? Because the result is our current logical system predicts many, many more meanings for modals than they actually have. So then, she will propose a system based on David Lewis's work and other insights from modal logic that will help us get to a point where we have an account of modality in natural language based on natural language expressions and not formal properties of the system, the logical system. Okay, I will stop here. Sorry for the extra time.
Thank you, Diti. That was really nice.
Any questions, people? Okay, I will drop this into the chat. People are very silent, so I don't know if I've put people to sleep or.
I have a question, but I don't know whether it's in the scope of asking it at this point or not. So rules I understood as in how we would define the rules for a particular relationship. But how would that work in the, how do we define morals and permissions? How would those be defined? Would there also be a system for that?
That's actually a good question, because in the semantics, people don't assume a way to generate this. These are magically present. Okay, so the set of rules that you saw that baby R relation gave you, right? Took a world, gave you a set of propositions and a rule. That is just present as part of your, infrastructure that you have. Even in Kratzer's work, we will see things called modal bases and ordering sources, and those are just magically present, right? The idea is an agent knows. An agent who is using a model knows what the rules are, knows what the obligations are, knows what the permissions are. And if we disagree, suppose you use a model and I use a model and we disagree with our models, then we are disagreeing on what those fundamental things are. But again, we know there is a set. And what is in that set? Maybe for you, certain rules hold, for me, certain rules hold, so at that level, you can have disagreements, but there can be there is no system of generation that I know of. Utpal might be able to correct myself if I'm wrong here. Inside the semantics, there is no way to tell us what demarcates set of morals. You just assume it to be a set of propositions that are your morality. Right.
Thanks.
Yeah. So these kind of things, even in natural language semantics, you see modal bases, for example. That's going to be a set of propositions. What is this modal base? Oh, it's just there. Right. So if you have an epistemic modal base, people just know a set of things, right? You know what you know, and it's a set. So it's just there. Right. But if you're looking to carve out within that thing, then you have to talk about things like, okay, evidence. Do I have evidence for this? I only have evidence for certain things, so I will only believe that. So maybe that's a subset of your set of propositions, like things like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, yeah, a lot about this has a lot to do with philosophy and how we think about the world. And not everything makes it into the formal part of the semantics. It's just assumed. Okay. Other questions?
Well, Rahul has been listening to you, Diti. Rahul, as in Roy, has been listening to you, and he has a question.
Oh no, mathematician's question.
Yeah, it's a terrible question, but
what you said was basically describing Boolean logic for me.
Yes.
I don't know who is downstairs, right? Okay, but there's this other fuzzy logic which I'm not a subscriber of, to be honest. Okay, but that removes the excluded middle. And then how would you deal in language with it? Because the should and all these things, I think, come in the excluded, removing the excluded middle, where the, how to explain should really come from the fact that you're excluding the middle. And here's Aisha.
So there are people who take the theory of, the mechanism of the excluded middle and then put it in their theories of modality. There are people who do that. There are people who do that who, that is an explicit assumption in their theories.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just not a subscriber of that. But
no. My question, what I heard while I was working on my own thing, the difference between must and should, what you were talking about, could that be explained by the fact that you're excluding the middle?
How so? Give me an example with an actual, natural language example. This is the best escape. Ask the mathematician to give a natural language example. That's the way you can avoid answering their question. Rahul?
So should brings in a probability. No, I'm saying that I should okay, now there's a probability that, so you said, all these things, but well, but it was nice talk.
Question. So how much of the, so it's true that the rules are magically.
Aisha, sorry, we missed all of Rahul's statements because of the internet connection. But
Oh dear. Oh
yeah,
dear.
we heard
Well,
like
all your
small
statements were missed because of the internet connection, and we're having a lot of trouble. Anyway, I think he just WhatsApp.
So if he was talking about probability, and Utpal also says this, there are theories of models with probability built in.
Right now, there are theories of models with probability. He's going to make himself a trick because he's had enough of linguistics.
But,
okay, so now
thanks to him for listening. Yeah, go on.
No, so I was wondering whether, so when the rules are, I understand that they are magically listed, but how much of, I mean, so is it a necessary assumption that we must make in natural language that the use of, let's say, weak or strong necessity is also conditioned by the rules, which laws apply? So for example, that if we use something like must, when it's a law which has got to do with a small group, right? And it's contrary to the general belief, right? So for example, if I were to say, take a feminist position and say that now men must do housework. Though that rule is not a generally assumed law, does this in natural language condition, which of the necessities you must use? And how is that represented in the system?
Right. So what you are talking about is the very fundamental notion of subjectivity versus objectivity in modality.
Right.
So an objective rule is something that is taken to be, universally acknowledged. Versus subjective is based on the event, on the agent. So that footnote I had about indexicality. This is where this thing comes in. Like if you have a specific speaker, right, and their knowledge base and their rules, and then a bunch of addressees that have the same knowledge, like it's a subjective. So there are theories of modality with subjectivity built in. So
so in modal logic per se, there's no way to build it in, right? Or is there a way?
You will have to have a very specific accessibility relation with that indexicality built in. Yes. So if you have that specific accessibility formally. Yeah, formalism you can make it work. If you have the indexicality inside the relation, and then you say it's a specific kind of accessibility relation where only these worlds are accessed, where I believe it or my friends believe it, then you can do that. This is the power of the accessibility relation system. Like you can build in anything inside the information.
And so those will all be serial frames. What kind of frames would they be? I mean, they would be minimally serial, right? And
if you are consistent with your rules, then there should be seriality. Yeah. Seriality basically rules out inconsistency because it's saying for every world in this thing that I'm starting out with, there is a world out there that this rule is followed. So I can't have contradictory
Right.
So if you are consistent in that little set of rules, then there should be seriality. Is my thought on that.
And it's illuminating for a syntactician like me. Thank you.
And Utpal is saying, let's wait for this tomorrow because he thinks I will discuss Macfarlane. Okay. Oh no. Okay. Now
Utpal is being unusually chatty. Okay, I'll wait for it tomorrow. Sorry, I
just meant Macfarlane as an example of indexicality with models.
Yes.
And if you weren't
as
going
I said,
to, you have to.
I don't know how much I want to get into indexicality, and but definitely a lot of, we'll do a lot of possible world semantics tomorrow. We'll see why Kretzer's work was so field changing.
Anyway, not to hog up questions. Anybody else has a question?
One question.
Yeah.
One.
Oh, just go ahead.
So the conception of common ground, which uses this accessibility relation of the speaker, that the speaker and hearer's world would then be having a symmetric frame. The common ground conception, which says that propositions, the presuppositions are those beliefs which a speaker is shared and knows in the common ground, that one. So I was figuring out what frame it would be, and if it's a symmetric frame, how do we do presupposition accommodation in that common ground?
Wait, so there are several things here. One thing is, so the common ground is shared between all speakers, right? So when you say, for example, a modal with an epistemic flavor, then sort of common ground is you know this, I know this, and we both know that we both know this, etc. Right? So based on that, I tell you, oh, Ram must be home now, and you say, yeah, actually, maybe 7 p.m. he reaches home or something, and now it's 7:30. Okay. So that's one thing. Presuppositions are a different beast, right? So you have to have some mechanism of accommodation irrespective of your model, like in your system. So and then models interact interesting ways with presupposition. So for example, if you have a factive verb like no, for example, and you embed a model under that factive verb, then you want to say, these are embedded models, which I haven't talked about. I don't think I'll have time to talk about. It seems like the things I won't talk about are many more than the things I will talk about. But anyway, so if you say, I know John, or Bill knows John must be home now. So then there is that sort of, okay, embedded must is there. There's all of that baggage there. And then you have a factive presupposition, or Bill knows John must be the murderer. Okay, so the factive verb comes with a presupposition. So then you have interesting interactions between that presupposition and the model. But with respect to the conceptual notion of a frame, don't think about the frame as interacting compositionally with parts of the sentence, if that makes sense. The frame is built into the meaning of the modal, right? So the frame itself has nothing to do with, okay, what is my next word? What is the word before? Am I embedded or not? Like, you see what I mean? The modal itself, the frame, what does a frame have? A frame has a set of words and a relation on that set. Remember, so the relation is what gives you the accessibility, the epistemic or the deontic, right? Or whatever, what other flavor. So that itself doesn't interact with, okay, is there a presupposition? Is there a verb? Is there a noun? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So the frame is just telling you what flavor of modality is there because of the accessibility relation inside the frame. Right? Then you do your compositional semantics, okay, after the modal already happens with the frame, then you do other things in the sentence, yeah.
That is. Thank you.
Hi, I had a question.
Any more questions?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Shauna. So in the definition of epistemic frame, you said that knowledge is considered to have the property of reflexivity. That is, if an agent knows a proposition in W, then it is true or is a fact in W. But what if my knowledge involves, my knowledge is based on verbal testimony from some people that I trust? And what if I have been lied to? Then how does but then I know that P, but P is actually not true. Then how can I say that I know P, and that it is also a fact in the given word?
Thank you for asking that question. So you have ventured into the domain of evidentiality a little bit. So based on someone else's testimony, you know something, right? But you can think about it this way. If you are able to say, so based on, let's say, some very independent, non-biased newspaper, like, let's say, maybe here in my context, the New York Times, let's say. Based on the New York Times, you read something on the New York Times, but maybe the reporter was wrong about it or some problem in reporting, whatever. The fact that you're able to use I know that, in that case, semanticists would tell you, okay, the analysis of know is based on each agent. Right? So it's the indexicality part comes in there. If you want to deal with these cases where maybe you trust someone's testimony and they have, lied to you, or they don't know themselves that they are wrong, etc. Then you take, we will see tomorrow, modal basis, can have indexicality built in, but the idea is based on what you know, you think that's true, right? So that's why you can use a statement like, I know that. Right. Let me know if that makes sense.
Okay. No,
so
because,
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
It's the individual agents epistemic base, like epistemic, the relation, your relation, the epistemic accessibility relation based on what you know.
Right.
Based on that, you can say, now based on what I know the reporter is lying. Okay, based on what I know, I cannot say I know that XYZ. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
We can have differing, so that's why the indexicality part becomes important, because it's very relativized to each of our knowledge bases.
Right. Then the next question that I would have is, do we admit verbal testimony as a valid means of having evidence in that case? That could be also debated upon, right? Like somebody could argue that only like direct perception or inference is a valid means of presenting evidence and so on and so forth, and not admit verbal testimony.
Yes. Yes, it seems like I'm discussing my dissertation now, but thank you for that question. So basically, yes. So people have argued in theories of evidentiality that hearsay or someone else's testimony cannot be the foundations of knowledge. Knowledge can only be gained, these are some people's theories, through direct perception. So your theory has to say somehow how you encode direct perception. That's also not a trivial question, how to do the semantics of direct perception. How to do the semantics of inference, which is based on propositional sets of propositions, right? Based on two propositions, you make an inference about a third proposition, etc. So only these things where you have, say, the power of deduction, only then can you say you know something. Think of know, as I mentioned Hintica in the beginning, as universal quantification over worlds accessible to you. Right? Now, if you have universal quantification, that means you're not allowing even a single world to not correspond to what you know. So yes, so people can differ on, okay, how trustworthy is my source? Am I going to make knowledge out of it? Or am I going to just do with perception and inference? And you're right, people can take that stance, right? That's fine. That's a fine stance. A lot of people have taken that stance. So, but I would encourage you to, like, these questions you're asking are, very valid questions in the literature on evidentiality. So you may find a lot of satisfying, natural language examples in that literature that show that languages don't allow contradictory statements after direct perception or inference. So for example, I cannot say, oh, I infer John must be home, but he's not home now. I cannot say that. But I can say, I heard John is home, but he's not home now.
Right.
Right. So these are sort of tests in the literature that, okay, if you can follow it with a contradictory continuation, you can only do it with hearsay or testimony. You cannot do it with direct perception and all. You can't say, I saw Ram go into that building, but he didn't go into that building. That's bad. So you cannot allow contradictory continuations with direct perception or inference. So the intuition is very valid that, okay, only those feed knowledge. And testimony can be contradicted by the agent themselves, so that doesn't feed knowledge per se.
Right. Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Should we wrap up? It's 9 p.m.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be taught by a former student. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here past time, and see you all tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Okay, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Diti.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Sakshi, also for setting it up.
Yeah, thanks, Sakshi.
Is that Binu? Is that the kiddo?
What?
Oh.
That's Benu's baby. She's a listen baby.
Oh. Huh?
Oh,
Acha, she comes to listen more.
Oh. Hello.
Hi.
Does she mean to say chahiye, which is a modal?
No.
Benu. Oh. Okay.
She's into English these days, I hear.
Yes.
Oh.
Thanks to Peppa Pig. British English, to be precise.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay. See you all
We
tomorrow.
should do a different reunion, Diti, with Zoom reunion with bachas and all that, and that entire batch. Your entire batch. And then Rahul says he has many questions, but
I have things to attend to. No, but I want to hear all his questions because I have never talked to him about linguistics.
Yeah, but it's only because now you're speaking comprehensible linguistics to him.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so no, tomorrow I'll ask him to note it down and email you.
My question is,
he wants to ask it now. Okay, so you'll have to answer.
The truth value of any statement, Diti, depends on the axioms you have. For example, a Gödelian statement, depends on, according to the axiom, it can be true. According to the axiom, it can be false. Right? So, so when you're talking about modal logic and everything, I think you have to also specify the axioms. And I mean, I'm a mathematician who's talking. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. There is a huge part of this that's axiomatic, and the axiomatic systems I did not put in here because I did not want to overwhelm, people who have not seen this or are seeing this. This is meant to be an introduction to sort of. But you're absolutely right that even these things that I'm calling T valid, D valid, I mean, I haven't proved them with axioms. I mean, I'm just
exactly because because there's nothing like a universal truth, as you all know, because it depends on the axiom. And in mathematics, there's nothing like a universal truth unless you specify the axiom. I'm sorry, I just overheard. I shouldn't.
No, you're absolutely right. And I took for granted certain things. And I said,
shut.
Yeah. So
sorry?
I'm saying in a more fully fledged handout where I have 3 or 4 hours to talk, I would have put in all the modus ponens and all the axioms and have them.
Yeah. So let's talk later because I was quite. It was a very nice talk, and
thank you.
And as a mathematician, of course, I liked it very much. But there was lots of assumptions which were taken, which I would question. Anyway, so here's Ayesha. I don't want to get into it.
Diti, you don't have any
So-
objection to us posting this on the Fling website, right?
No. And I'm sorry I didn't have all of the proofs in the handout. That would have taken me a few more hours to get through.
Yeah.
But so all the axiomatic, assumptions behind this system, like all this validity stuff, is not trivial at all. Like you have to prove them. So
Right.
I did take them for granted. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Rahul was
But
right. Yes.
Yeah, they're always right, mathematicians. So.
Yes. Right is
Thanks
subjective.
so much,
though.
Diti. Looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay. See you all.
Okay.
Bye. Good night.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.